Thank you. I want to thank Ranking Member Lucas, Chairwoman Johnson, my colleagues in this committee and committee staff from both sides of the aisle for their input in writing this legislation and for allowing for its full consideration. I urge my colleagues to support my legislation, the Identifying Outputs of Generative Adversarial Networks Act, a bit of a tongue twister as we're all trying to pronounce it, but to direct research on the underlying technology used to produce deepfakes. The Iogan Act will allow us to develop much-needed tools to identify authentic videos, voice reproduction, or photos generated by deepfakes. Deepfakes are not a new phenomenon. I assume most of you have seen the movie Forrest Gump. It's one of my favorites of all time. If you'll remember some of the famous scenes where Forrest Gump was filmed shaking hands with various presidents, was fighting in Vietnam, and all sorts of different things throughout the video. At the time, the technique was revolutionary, and it was incredibly expensive and difficult to reproduce, to the point that really only big Hollywood studios with massive budgets could afford to produce deepfakes with such images. So fast forward a few decades later, after Forrest Gump, and we now live in a world where advances in technology and computing power have increased exponentially. This increase in power has enabled techniques like GANs to be developed, making deepfakes easier and cheaper than ever to be produced and disseminated on the internet. Techniques to produce deepfakes are constantly improving and has made it extremely difficult to distinguish between fact and fiction. Experts say that eventually techniques will get so refined that deepfakes will be indistinguishable from real recordings, pictures, or videos. Given the national security and societal implications that deepfakes can pose for our country, my legislation directs the NSF, in consultation with other federal agencies, to conduct research on the science and ethics of deepfakes. This includes fundamental research on digital forensic tools and social and behavioral research on the human engagement with the networks. My bill also directs NIST to support research for the development of measurements and standards necessary to accelerate the advance of the technological tools to examine the function and outputs of any type of deepfake technology. The legislation also directs NSF and NIST to jointly submit a report on the feasibility of research opportunities through public-private partnerships. The goal here is to identify new emerging technologies that could produce deepfakes by using different techniques. The report shall also provide Congress with any recommendations that could facilitate and improve the communication and coordination between the private sector and federal agencies to devise innovative techniques in the detection of deepfakes. Finally, I would like to add that the ability to identify and label deepfake content is critical to preventing foreign actors or terrorist organizations from using manipulated media to influence U.S. public opinion. I'm proud to see the Iogan Act addressing the needs to educate and train a new type of workforce in digital forensics, which will be a profession that will be in greater demand for many years to come. One of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle likes to say, if we're going to be divided, gosh dang it, it better be with real information and among Americans. While that is, you know who I'm talking about. And I share that. And so this bill, my hope is, will be a factor in making sure that the content that's being produced and presented into our public discourse is genuine and real. I also want to take the time to thank Representatives Stevens, Baird, and Katie Hill for their support. With that, I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 4355, and I yield back.